Hello and welcome back to this segment number 15, final segment of our podcast series that we're entitling America Under Fire, The Old Guy Speaks. This final section is to encourage you in the light of what we've been discussing. Took much longer than I anticipated to get here to our last segment, which is to encourage you amid the turmoil of the times. There are so many national, international, and even civilization scale topics and updates that could be discussed. But I'm aging out and will leave that to others, meaning you right there. My purpose has been to pass along some info and perspectives to the younger set with the hope that you will be moved to seek and pursue truth about some of the challenges that confront us as a people. So as promised, I also want to encourage you and to tell you that as you advocate for truth against great odds, you need not and must not let frank talk of these and other challenges in life weigh you down to a point where you give up or despair of hope. Humans have faced far greater danger without despair, and you and I must not lose hope. Let's consider some sources of hope that together will allow you to understand the bigger picture and to appreciate and enjoy life even as we face the challenges of the current times. So, here we go. First off, America is still America. Consider President Woodrow Wilson's enduring words as follows. A nation which does not remember what it was yesterday does not know what it is today, nor what it is trying to do. We're trying to do a futile thing if we do not know where we came from or what we have been about. So, first of all, please remember that you live in the United States of America, a nation uniquely conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all people are created equal in the sight of God and of the law. If you haven't, read our Declaration of Independence and our Constitution, including its Bill of Rights and other adopted amendments. Then let's consider just a few examples of the enduring symbolism of America. And I have about a half a dozen of these. Number one, the Washington Monument is the highest structure in the District of Columbia, and thus the first to catch the light of the rising sun each day. And the east face of the aluminum cap at the top of the stone structure is still inscribed with the words Laus Deo, meaning praise be to God. And biblical phrases still line the walls of the stairwell inside. And there is still a Bible sealed in a capsule within the monument's cornerstone with its amazing and redeeming message of hope to all. Number two. Number two, Moses still stands at the peak of the east front of the U.S. Supreme Court building, holding the two tablets with the Ten Commandments, which also appear inside the building above the head of the court's Chief Justice. And each Supreme Court session still opens and closes with the crier's words, God save the United States and this honorable court. Number three, the fourth stanza of our national anthem still reminds us that our national motto is, in God we trust. And so does every piece of U.S. currency, every paper bill and coin in our pockets. There you go, one more reason to avoid digital currency. Number four, in God we trust appears opposite the President of the U.S. Senate, and on the marble backdrop behind the Speaker of the U.S. House of Representatives. The focal point of the private prayer chapel set aside in the Capitol building for members of the House and Senate is a stained glass window showing George Washington kneeling in prayer. Numerous other references to God or the Bible appear elsewhere in the public spaces, and every session of the House and Senate begins with prayer by a chaplain. Number 5, numerous quotations from Scripture, the Bible, are found in the Library of Congress building, and the Ten Commandments are inscribed in bronze on the floor of the National Archives. Okay, number 6, and for this one, I'll give you a moment to pull out a U.S. $1 bill. We're going to talk about some of the symbolism on that dollar bill. That triangular eye on the back of your $1 bill is the eye of providence, meaning God's protective and just eye overseeing the nation. It's shown on the back side of the Great Seal of the United States, along with the Latin phrase annuit septus, meaning He or God has favored us. And another more widely known Latin motto, taken from the 4th poem of the Roman poet Virgil's Eclogues, quote, Novus Ordo Seclorum, unquote, meaning a new order of the ages is born. Charles Thomson, who served as secretary to both the First and Second Continental Congresses, then to the Confederation Congress, was the designer of our Great Seal. And it was he who adopted the motto from Virgil, saying that it signified, quote, the beginning of the new American era, unquote, in 1776. And definitely not the New World Order being bandied about now by the Marxists of the World Economic Forum. The other side, front side of our national seal, also shown on the back of the $1 bill, contains the Latin words e pluribus unum, meaning out of many, one, our long-cherished ideal of the melting pot, encouraging the controlled immigration of people of many cultures who wish to become Americans, to learn our language and adopt our ways. The melting pot ideal must certainly give our World Economic Forum and other Marxist friends fits as they seek to divide us and get us fighting among ourselves. Looking further back in time, the Christian influence in Europe revolutionized concepts of government and brought about the civil freedoms and the benefits that Western Europe and the U.S. have enjoyed for centuries. It challenged the fundamental principle of 17th century political government in Europe, the divine right of kings. Under the new biblical framework, all people, even the king, were under the law and not above it. The basic idea of government based on the absolutes of the Bible was finally realized in colonial America. Some of those who signed our Declaration of Independence and our Constitution may not have been Christians in the required full sense, yet they recognized and advocated the need for government based on and bound by biblical absolutes, producing concepts like all men, meaning all people, being created equal, and that we are the holders of unalienable rights conferred by our Creator. Those unalienable rights conferred by a higher authority, by God Himself, cannot be taken away by any mortal person, including Karl Marx and Klaus Schwab. The American founders knew that if there were no God, there could be no absolute rights. That if the unalienable rights they were adopting were not seen in the context of Judeo-Christian theism, they were without content. Our Declaration of Independence professes faith in a Creator who governs the affairs of mankind via absolute standards to which we are held accountable. And it recognizes and incorporates the universally known principle that we are imperfect people and thus cannot be our own judge and lawgiver. This concept of governing continues as our national guiding light still today, even though cultural Marxism has mounted a very effective campaign of destruction against it. You have to give them credit for their century-long focused march through the institutions of American culture and governance, where they now control most of the academy, the media, the government, and other centers of power. The best recent example of that to me is when the Hamas-Israel war brought out university students in America to protest against rather than for Israel, the place where Western thought, things like equal and unalienable rights, originated. I have to say that I was also relieved to later learn that over half of the protesters at least Harvard were professional agitators hired by Marxist billionaires and foundations. The appearance of identical new tents aligned in military precision sure didn't look like it was done by university students a month or so before final exams. Learn to discern. Big Squib and book. Let me digress briefly to share just a few insights from the first pages of a book that I highly commend to you. This is Dinesh D'Souza's 2007 book, What's So Great About Christianity? And to my old friend Rob, this is one of the two books I commend most to you, Rob. Okay, let's touch on just 4 things that D'Souza is seeing. Number 1, the world is experiencing what he called an explosion of religious conversion and growth, with Christianity growing faster than any of the others. And the ranks of unbelievers are shrinking as a proportion of the world's population. But sadly, not here in the U.S. From D'Souza, quote, "The new face of Christianity is not white and blonde. It's yellow, black, and brown, and the social landscape of the Bible of poverty and hardship is familiar to them," unquote. Number 2, religious people have an animating sense of purpose and far higher birth rates, while secular regions like Europe have very low birth rates. The demographics can't be denied. Number 3, here in the U.S., the liberal Christian church, which D'Souza defines as seeking to change the church rather than the church changing the world. The liberal Christian church is shrinking, with the traditional or conservative church experiencing healthy growth. Number 4, so even with religion in overall decline in America, atheists, including Marxists, are seeing the rejuvenating nature, a kind of reawakening or renewal of the Christian church. And in response, most are mounting greater and greater campaigns of opposition to it, because Marxism must defeat religion, but it won't. That completes the 4 observations that Dinesh D'Souza had. I said that most atheists are opposing Christianity because that situation is changing just a bit. With sincere thanks to columnist and TV host Aaron McIntyre of Blaze News, let me illustrate with mention of a note of noted British biologist and atheist Richard Dawkins, who is probably best known for his vocal opposition to religion in general and Christianity in particular. In a recent appearance, Mr. Dawkins actually lamented the lost influence of Christianity, going so far as to declare himself a cultural Christian. He apparently liked and now misses some aspects of Christianity, perhaps the unspoken codes of demeanor and relationship, the joyful trappings of the Christmas and Easter holidays, and so on. Now that public Christianity has been largely purged from his native Britain, the biologist is surprised that instead of becoming a secular utopia, the country has been slowly converting to Islamic culture. Like many atheists, Dawkins is discovering too late that the religious beliefs he worked so hard to destroy were in fact the foundation on which his civilization rested. The first hint that all may not be well inside the brave new world the atheist had forged came with the birth of the woke revolution on college campuses. McIntyre reports that Dawkins's variety of new atheism had supported the feminist, LGBTQ, and anti-racist movements. But then those movements went, in McIntyre's words, off the rails, with feminists making men and women interchangeable, race activists asserting that all differences in material outcomes were due to racism, and LGBTQ activists asserting that men could become real women. These, again in McIntyre's words, these empirically false assertions struck at the core of atheist belief that religion had been the primary cause of opposition to scientific truth. So Christianity had been purged from the public square. But instead of being replaced with reason and rationality, it had been replaced with a more extreme quote, denial of reality, unquote. The second blow to the new atheist delusion followed the migrant crisis in Europe. As millions of Islamic migrants flooded the shores of Western nations, became clear that the lack of cohesive religious identity made it difficult for the host populations to resist cultural onslaught. European elites, raised on a steady diet of liberal ideology, could not formulate a reason to deny entry to the large influx of migrants, and in many cases competed to see who could be more accommodating. These immigrants had little interest in assimilating into a culture they believed to be weak and decadent. And the sheer size of the migration meant that large ethnic ghettos could form to protect the new competing beliefs, including no-go zones where even law enforcement dared not enter. Mr. Dawkins's delusion of a rational and secular European utopia is fading into the distance. Without Christianity to spiritually animate the other aspects of its cultural identity, Europe has seemed to slowly lose the will to live, abandoning its fate to a new and energetic population that will not adopt the European way of life. And America appears to me to be on a similar path, though not so far along, and there are still off-ramps to other paths that we in America can follow if we can find the will to do so. Squib. This podcast series regarding cultural Marxism has not uncovered Islam, which poses an equally grave threat to Judeo-Christian based American culture, and interestingly also to our secular humanist, agnostic, and atheistic friends and critics like Dawkins. But I can recommend a book if you're looking for a good overview of Islam. Book here somewhere. It's called Secrets of the Koran, Koran, by Don Richardson, released in 2003. He wanted to learn what had led to the Islamic attacks of 9/11/2001 in America. So he studied all 7 of the available English translations of Islam's sacred book, the Quran. And his book covers both the Quran and how it translates into practice. Don Richardson foresaw the day when an atheist like Richard Dawkins could long for life in a Christian-derived culture. And to my old friend Rob, this is the other book that I recommend especially to you. Okay, moving on, and back to immigration in general as part of this encouragement segment. Regarding a different aspect of immigration, you'll find that the American Christian Church, and I believe also the practicing European Church, are following the Christian mandate to minister to the needs of the stranger among us. And there are many such ministries working in international communities here in the U.S. That ongoing Christian hospitality work must continue and expand in order to show the love of Christ to individual immigrants. So there's a conundrum similar to that regarding the Good Samaritan, as mentioned in segment 12 on immigration. When the influx of illegal immigrants becomes so large that it starts to overpower the host nation, I believe the Christian is called upon to do 2 things that are seemingly contradictory, and to do them concurrently. To minister to individual people simply because they're people made in the image of God, and to simultaneously repel, by military force if necessary, repel the great hordes being organized and utilized to destroy our nation and culture, the very infrastructure that greatly aids the Christian to minister to individuals. It's one of history's more difficult, yet readily understood, conundrums. The Christians among us know and believe that God is on his throne, and that although we may need to traverse a deep valley of political darkness, God's light still shines above all the clouds, and that he is in control, even in a nation that's turning away from him. If you feel a sense of despair or loss of hope regarding the Marxist attacks on America, you need what D'Souza has called an animating sense of purpose, which I believe can be found in Christianity alone. I invite you to do 2 things. Number 1, examine the beliefs and the claims of the Christian faith. Get a Bible written in a translation using today's English. I recommend the New Living Translation. And preferably get what's called a study Bible that includes explanatory notes. And better yet, also get a good Bible commentary along with it, perhaps the Moody Bible Commentary, Moody, M-O-O-D-Y, meaning Moody Bible Institute of Chicago. And read them. Just as importantly, find a church that preaches the Bible straight and true, and tap into both the fellowship and the learning that are going on there. You'll find that followers of Jesus have all the same problems and shortcomings as anyone else, and that what they're building together is an undergirding knowledge and understanding that God is in control even when his people suffer. That's what keeps me grounded, even in the midst of researching and acknowledging the terrible things I've been discussing here. And it can be very difficult to gain the undergirding knowledge and understanding, some would say virtually impossible to do, in the absence of some sort of authentic Christian community, meaning a church. Quote, "A cord of 3 strands is not easily broken," unquote. Meaning that an enemy may defeat one person, but 2 or 3 together can build up and defend themselves and each other much more effectively. Okay, moving further along now. It may seem strange to hear this for an old white guy, but I have found lessons and perspectives in the overcoming of slavery in the U.S. and in the later civil rights movement. To understand the evil side of our fallen human nature, pick up a book by Mr. William Still, S-T-I-L-L. It's entitled The Underground Railroad Records. Still was a contemporary of Harriet Tubman in the 1840s and 1850s, and a leading conductor along a primary underground railroad route to freedom from slavery in the North. His book will cure you of any naivete about the blessings of freedom. I have also found perspective and inspiration in the life of Dr. Martin Luther King. And I should say that I have only an average knowledge about him. But his April 16, 1963 letter from a Birmingham jail certainly illustrates the problems and challenges of that era. On my printer is a quote from Dr. King's letter, which was written amidst opposition from even the Christian clergy of that city. Quote, "I believe that unarmed truth and unconditional love will have the final word in reality. That is why right, temporarily defeated, is stronger than evil triumphant." Unquote. Right, temporarily defeated, is stronger than evil triumphant. Anyway, read Dr. King's letter from a Birmingham jail. It was written to local clergy who had either not supported his efforts or told him to wait, that the time for integration and equal rights hadn't yet come. Among other things, they questioned his non-compliance with certain laws. He explained that there are both just and unjust laws, and said he agreed with St. Augustine that an unjust law is no law at all. King further explained that, quote, "A just law is a man-made code that squares with the moral law or the law of God," and that, quote, "An unjust law is a code that is out of harmony with the moral law." And also, quote, "To put it in the terms of St. Thomas Aquinas, an unjust law is a human law that is not rooted in eternal law and natural law." Okay, it's time for a sidebar definition here. Natural law is universal truths or principles or rules that properly govern human conduct. The moral principles that all mankind is born knowing intuitively without ever having heard the term. Classical or traditional natural law attributes those truths and principles to God as the divine source of all law. And secular natural law proponents attribute those truths and principles to reason. In any event, I am attracted to Dr. King's principles of nonviolent confrontation or resistance as the first line of defense against our contemporary woes. The downside, of course, is that in confronting a proposed evil like digital currency, you may face more formidable forces than fire hoses and police dogs. Okay, let's move along now to the second of my two recommendations to you. Number 2, get involved. Just 2 words, get involved. Oppose existing evils like gain of lethal function virus research, and oppose proposed evils like digital currency. Pick up the burdens of citizenship now so as to lessen the burdens that your children and grandchildren will have to bear later, including via inflation. They're already on the hook to pay back the extra trillions that we have spent. Educate yourself on the issues and find others of like mind. Volunteer to help political candidates who support government based on American ideals and principles. Read Dr. King's letter from a Birmingham jail. Study and understand his practice of honorable nonviolent resistance. Read Saul Alinsky's book, Rules for Radicals, so you can understand the twisted mindset and tactics of the other side. Write letters, not long letters, but preferably cogent 1 or 2 page letters focused on one issue that the recipient, your representative, your senator, your governor, your president, whoever, one issue that the recipient may have the power to change. Long diatribes are of limited interest in government offices. There's no time to deal with them. Support the many organizations that stand for truth and for justice and for those unalienable rights I mentioned earlier. Now, as an aside, I've mentioned just a very few of the hundreds of good organizations that are out there. And I recently received a fundraising letter from a great organization reporting that their donations are down something like 47 or 49% this year as consumer inflation starts biting harder. And very importantly, support the church, where you find the teaching and the mutually supportive relationships needed for you to gain a personal relationship with God and his 3 persons. Read the book and talk to a pastor. You'll learn what that means. It's a little like the mask that popped down from the ceiling of the airliner. You'll need to put your mask on so that you can help others. Then just a word regarding one of the strongest weapons available in this life, which is prayer. Pray for all of those in positions of authority, regardless of whether you see them as friend or foe. Pray that God will soften and change hearts, that he will open eyes that are blinded to the truths of the Bible and of natural law, and that his manifest presence will be seen and felt by all, so that his law and his way will be honored and come to govern in the hearts of all mankind. And one final squib regarding what you can find in the teaching and fellowship of the church. There are many wonderful things to be found there, 2 of which are significance. You are significant to God and loved by him. And security. You can experience peace in him. Significance and security. The bottom line is a kind of freedom that can be experienced even amidst the perils of this time in history. It's a living hope, stronger than even death. In all of this, please remember that God is on his throne and that we are not alone. I guess I'm a poet and don't know it. Take heart in Dr. King's words, that right temporarily defeated is stronger than evil triumphant. And rekindle your resolve via these words from Thomas Jefferson. My God, how little do my countrymen know what precious blessings they are in possession of, and which no other people on earth enjoy. And with that, all that's left is to say thank you for watching this podcast series. One of my favorite sayings at age 81 is that sometimes age brings wisdom. Other times it comes alone. And who knows which this podcast has been. I sincerely thank you, especially if you've endured the entire series, and I pray that it will have benefited both you and our beloved United States of America. Thank you.